Now, as part of your examination of latent fingerprints, are you familiar with a methodology known as ACE-V?
Yes. ACE-V is used when we move on to the comparison stage of fingerprints.
Can you tell us what the ACE-V methodology is?
Yes. ACE-V stands for analysis, comparison, evaluation, and verification. At the analysis stage, I am looking at details of the ridge detail that have been recovered and looking at different levels of detail and analyzing them to determine their quality and quantity and if they can move on to the comparison stage of ACE-V. At the comparison stage of ACE-V is when I have determined that this fingerprint or this latent print does have enough of these details to be compared to a known impression. And at the evaluation stage of ACE-V, I am coming to a conclusion. That conclusion can be identification, exclusion, and inconclusive. And then finally, the V in ACE-V stands for verification, and that is the independent application of the ACE portion of ACE-V by another examiner to verify my work.
If I could bring you back to the analysis part of the ACE-V, you mentioned that is the examination of ridge detail. Is that correct?
Correct.
And any time, is it true that every time you touch an item, you will leave a print that is of value for your purposes, that is, the purposes of an examiner?
No. Fingerprints are often known as chance impressions, which means that every time someone touches something, they may or may not leave a fingerprint. So a fingerprint may not be left even if a person touches the surface.
And could you leave a print that showed some ridge detail but not enough ridge detail for you to make use for comparison purposes?
Yes.
That determination, whether there's enough ridge detail for you to make use of it, would take place at the analysis stage?
That's correct.
Once you've determined that there's been a print left with sufficient ridge detail for comparison, at the comparison stage, do you look at different levels of detail inside the print itself?
Yes.
Approach, Your Honor. Ms. Tolan, do you recognize that chart or diagram?
Yes.
Okay, and what do you recognize that to be?
It's a representation of the three levels of detail that we use at the analysis stage, just with pictures and locations of where fingerprints can be left from on the hand.
And just to be clear, that diagram does not involve any prints from this case, is that correct?
No.
They're illustrations to help you explain the levels of detail?
Yes, that's correct.
Your Honor, at this time I'd just like to have that marked for identification as a chalk.
T.T.
Your Honor, we have no objection. Just that this topic has been covered, and we would be looking for something cumulative. Might be objecting if we go too far. Have covered this topic.
All right, well, let's see if we go too far. Let me know.
Ms. Tolan, just in terms of the way you look at the different levels, do you move from level to level as the comparison process goes along?
I'd agree with that, yes.
Okay, so can you tell us about what level 1 detail is?
Level 1 detail is just the overall ridge flow of the ridge detail that I'm analyzing. So in the tips of your fingers, you can have loops, whorls, and arches, and they take different, they flow in different manners as represented here. Level 2 details are the paths that those ridges take within that overall ridge flow. And basically we have bifurcations and ending ridges. Bifurcations are similar to like a fork in the road where one ridge comes along and splits into two. Ending ridge is similar to like a dead-end street where it just stops in mid-space. And then our level 3 details are the edges of the ridges and their contour, as well as the size and shape of the pores on those on the ridges in your fingers.
So the bifurcation that you talked about back up on the top row of level 2 is shown in blue, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that is what you described as the fork in the road?
Correct.
And then the ending ridge, which I've circled, is highlighted in yellow?
Yes.
And lastly, the dot is indicated in pink, is that correct?
Correct.
What are some of the factors that go into determining whether a print that's suitable for comparison will actually be left on a surface?
So one of the factors is that fingerprints are those chance impressions. A person may not leave a fingerprint even if they've touched an item or the surface. The condition of someone's skin, if their hands are very dry, they may not have any material on them or sweat to transfer to a surface when they touch the item. Their hands could be dirty as well. The environment that a fingerprint might be left in. So if a fingerprint has been left on a surface, possibly outside, or an item that has been outside and it has rained or snowed, that fingerprint could have been wiped away. The surface, whether it's dirty, whether it's clean, whether it's porous or non-porous, so does it repel liquids or does it soak up liquids? The size of the surface, small and curved and textured, are less conducive to completely smooth and flat surfaces.
Okay. And I want to direct your attention, Ms. Tolan, to July 1st of 2013. Were you working on that date in the latent print unit?
Yes.
And at that time, were you a criminalist 4 or a criminalist 3?
I was a criminalist 3 at that time.
Were you asked on that date to go to the exam bay at Boston Police Department headquarters?
Yes.
Okay. And the latent print unit is also located at Boston Police Department headquarters, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And what was the purpose in going to the exam bay at Boston Police Department headquarters on July 1st of 2013?
A request was received in our unit that we process a Toyota 4Runner in the exam bay.
And whose request was that?
Sergeant Detective Mark Sullivan.
The areas of the Toyota 4Runner that you processed on July 1st of 2013, can you tell the members of the jury what areas that you processed?
Sure. We processed the exterior door handles, the interior passenger areas, so that would include the front passenger and driver seats areas, as well as the rear driver and passenger side seats. The windows, rear view mirrors, visor mirrors, console areas, dashboard, the side panels on the interior of the doors, as well as actually the headrest poles of the front and driver headrests, the metal poles that connect the headrest to the seats themselves.
Did you also do any processing or examination of the gas cap and the door to the gas tank?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, before you actually went and processed the vehicle for fingerprints, did you notice anything else about some portions or some sections of the interior of the car?
The glass surfaces, such as the windows and the rearview mirror and visor mirrors, appear to have white marks on them from either something being wiped on them or possibly cleaned.
And that was without regard to actual fingerprints, that was just what you observed prior to processing the car for fingerprints?
Correct.
Your Honor, if I could have these photographs marked without objection as the next number of exhibits.
And they are of what?
I'm sorry?
What are they?
Oh, photographs of the interior of the vehicle.
No objection. Counsel, why don't we mark them all 238A through E? I take it they're all related to the same vehicle.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's just to keep straight that these all tie into one piece of evidence or one item. That was without objection, Mr. Bias?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Tolan, if I could ask you to take a look at what's been marked as exhibit number 238, letters A through E. Do you recognize what's shown in those pictures?
Yes.
Okay, and what's shown in those pictures? And why don't we just go through them one by one? If you could go through and take us through 238A first.
This picture is a representation of white powder that we had used to process the rear passenger side of the vehicle, the door, and is just showing the white marks on the door panel as well as the portion of the window.
Okay. And what about exhibit number 238B?
238B is also a photograph of after we had used white powder on the front interior driver's side door, and captures the white marks on the smooth surfaces of the door panel as well as the window.
And what about 238C?
It's just the same area, picture of the same area after white powder of the front front driver's side door.
And 238D?
Another photograph of a white mark on the front driver's side window.
And lastly, 238E.
And this is a photograph of us after processing with white powder, white marks on the visor mirror of the driver's side.
Showing you 238B. The inside window of the front of the driver's side door, can you point, and you can use your finger actually, to the area where you saw the streaks that appeared to have been wipe marks from either wiping or cleaning?
So on the door panel, they're actually, I'm not sure if it's working for you.
Oh, okay.
The picture actually went away. Oh, there we go.
Are you able to,
Here we go. Yes. So on the door panel, the circled pink area would be considered a white mark.
and for the record, Ms. Tolan has drawn a circle around the veneered area just below the windowsill on the driver's side door.
And then on the interior of the driver's side window, there's a white mark kind of going back and forth, also circled in pink. And another area on the interior window would be the additional circle of pink.
And the second circle that Ms. Tolan drew is roughly at 3 o'clock on the surface of the window, and the third circle she drew, for the record, is roughly at 11 o'clock. Showing you 238E. You described the visor on the driver's side door as having the similar streak marks as well.
Yes.
I'll move on until we can get that sorted out, Ms. Tolan. So, on the areas that you described earlier as having processed for fingerprints, did you find evidence of any fingerprints in any of the areas that you mentioned before?
Not on the areas I had mentioned before.
Directing your attention now to the, did the vehicle that you looked at on July 1st of 2013 have a sunroof?
Yes.
Okay. And did you at some point examine the sunroof or process that for fingerprints?
Yes.
And what were the results that you obtained as a result of processing the sunroof for fingerprints?
We recovered one latent print that we marked the letter A from the sunroof, interior sunroof.
And with respect to that, how can you explain to the members of the jury how you actually processed that print and explain how you photographed it?
We processed the sunroof with white powder, and we took overall photos documenting the location of latent A, and then we actually recovered the ridge detail by using a hinge lift.
And what is a hinge lift?
It became item number 57. Latent remained labeled as latent A.
Okay. And when you looked at item number 58, latent A, what did you see?
There was not enough detail in that fingerprint that I recovered to move on to a comparison stage, so it was insufficient to move on to the comparison stage.
So there was ridge detail, but not sufficient enough for you to make a further comparison?
Correct.
Showing you those three pictures, Ms. Tolan, do you recognize those?
Yes.
Okay. And what are those pictures of?
They are the photographs that we took to document the overall location of Latent A on the sunroof itself. It has a scale in the photograph that's placed alongside the ridge detail that we see, and the letter A is written on the scale.
And are the first two photographs basically the same photograph of the same hinge lift, but one taken a little bit closer than the other?
Correct.
Do they both fairly and accurately show the photographs of the hinge lift that you took on that July 1st, 2013?
Yes.
And what about the third photograph?
We could stipulate all of this.
What's that a picture of, the third?
A close-up of the ridge detail that was on the hinge lift that I recovered. I took it back at the lab.
Your Honor, at this time I'd offer those as the next exhibit.
No objection.
Let's receive them as 239 A, B, and C.
The other areas of the car that you described, the exterior door handles, interior windows, interior passenger areas, the leather surfaces, the rods from the driver and passenger headrests, the gas door and the gas cap. From those areas, did you recover any fingerprints or ridge detail, whether of value or not?
No, we did not.
Showing you exhibit number 239A. Is that a photograph of the hinge lift or the latent print that you found on the underside of the sunroof?
Yes.
And that's what you labeled as A?
Yes.
And showing you 239C, is this a photograph of the actual hinge lift itself?
Yes.
And from that, you determined that there was not enough or insufficient ridge detail for you to make a comparison.
Correct.
I want to direct your attention now to February 27th of 2015. On that date, were you asked to examine and process a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver in connection with this case?
Yes.
And where was that done?
Back at the lab at Boston Police Headquarters.
And at whose request was that?
When an item is submitted, basically because this case got linked to the car, it was automatically assigned to me. I'm not sure who put in the request, but we automatically process all firearms-related evidence, so it automatically got assigned to me because it was linked to another CC number.
And did you do an initial examination of the revolver?
Yes.
And what did you note when you initially examined the revolver?
That it had been previously processed and that there was negative ridge detail.
Okay, so let's talk about first the previous processing. How were you able to tell that it had been previously processed?
As I described before, when an item is superglue fumed, there is a whitish color that adheres to areas on the surface, and I could tell that the item had been previously processed with superglue fumes because this whitish residue did exist on the item.
In addition to evidence of previous fuming, did you see any other evidence that it might have been processed before you received it?
I also had received documentation from the state police saying their documentation had stated that they did superglue fume the item and dye stain it.
Did you see any visual evidence of previous dye staining?
Yes, the item had a greenish yellowish tint to it in addition to the white residue on the surfaces.
Now, having seen evidence that it had been previously been fumed and previously been dye stained, did you then make a decision about whether you would fume it and you would dye stain it yourself?
Yes.
And what decision did you eventually make?
I was not going to reprocess the item because it appeared to have been sufficiently processed previously.
And when you looked at the item, were you looking at it to see if you could see any evidence of ridge detail in the revolver?
Yes.
And what was the result when you looked at the revolver for ridge detail?
There was negative ridge detail. I didn't see any.
What process did you use to look at the ridge detail? In other words, did you just look with your naked eye, or did you use some other means to look for the ridge detail?
Would have looked with my naked eye, possibly a flashlight with oblique angle, and then I also visualized the item under an alternate light source.
And what does an alternate light source do with respect to an item like the revolver that's been previously treated?
The alternate light source helps to make the superglued print more visible as long as a dye stain had been used after the superglue fuming process. So basically the alternate light source reacts with the dye stain that was placed on the item.
And was it your testimony before that when an item is treated with dye stain, after the conclusion of that, it is then rinsed under water to rinse off the excess dye?
Yes.
In addition to looking at the item for previous treatment and then looking at the item to see if there was any ridge detail visible, did you do any other examination of the gun?
Yes.
And what examination did you do?
I removed the grips from the handle of the firearm.
And what did you do after you removed the grips from the firearm?
I superglue fumed the grips and then used a dye stain after the superglue fuming process.
And after fuming the grips and dye staining the grips, what area of the grips did you look at, if any, after they had been treated?
The side of the grips that were not on the external portion of the firearm, as well, I would have looked at the external parts of the grips as well, especially after the dye stain.
And the inside of the grips, that is the side that was facing the handle of the gun, the metal handle of the gun, was that treated or untreated wood?
Untreated.
And what was the result of your examination of the underside or the interior portion of the wooden grips?
There was ridge detail not sufficient for capture, so I saw some ridge detail, but not enough to take a photograph of.
Okay. So when you say not sufficient for capture, what is that a reference to? Does that have to do with whether you will even photograph it or not?
Correct. So when we're deciding to take photographs of latents, we do also analyze those 3 levels of detail that I explained before to see the quality and quantity of them. And in this case, I saw some ridge detail, but not even enough to take a photograph. So I came to the determination that it would be insufficient to be identified.
So, for example, less ridge detail than we see in 239C.
That's possible, yes.
Well, you didn't photograph it as a result of the amount of ridge detail that you saw.
That's correct.
Did you make any observations with respect to the exterior of the grips? That is, the grips, the part of the grips that would have been exposed.
The overall condition of the firearm was, I would say, in poor condition. It looked used, it was dirty, rusty. So I just would say not in a brand new condition.
Did you see any evidence of ridge detail on the outside of the grips?
Not that I remember. The ridge detail that I saw, I'm not sure if it was on the underside of the grips or if it was on the external side of those grips.
And lastly, in addition to receiving the revolver, item 13, did you then look at some additional pieces of evidence that came with the revolver?
Yes, there was 2 cartridges.
Okay. And with respect to item number 14, what kind of processing or examination did you do with respect to those 2 items?
I just did a visual, and it was the same, I noticed the same white residue on the cartridges and that greenish yellowish tint to it, so I actually did not do any further processing techniques on those 2 cartridges.
And am I to understand that you saw prior evidence of fuming and dye staining?
Correct.
All right. And did you notice, were you able to detect any ridge detail, or did you simply not do an examination for ridge detail?
No, I did a visual examination and there was negative ridge detail.
Ms. Tolan, are you aware of any studies done by the latent print unit at the Boston Police Department regarding how frequently latent prints are recovered from firearms?
We keep statistics on the recovery of fingerprints from firearms.
And what percentage of firearms that the latent print unit examines reveals evidence of any kind of ridge detail?
About 38% of the time.
And of that 38%, did your study include a calculation of how many or what percentage of that number were sufficient for comparison purposes?
Yes, it was about 16% of the time.
And lastly, was there any calculations done indicating what percentage of those that were able to be compared ended up in identifications?
Yes, it's about 8% of the time.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Vyas.
May it please the court, Mr. Lee. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Ms. Tolan.
Good afternoon.
Congratulations on your baby.
Thank you.
I'll try and conclude my cross-examination by the time he's 10. What you do is very important in an investigation. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, it can be.
Okay, and of course, your job is to document and sometimes process items at a crime scene.
Yes.
Okay, and the documentation could be critical to a case,
I'd agree with that.
and so could the processing.
Yes.
Okay, and you would agree you never get a second chance at a crime scene.
I'd agree with that, yes.
Okay, so that's why what you do and when you do it is critical.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about, before I go into anything further, your examination of the gun did not create any link to Aaron Hernandez, right?
No, it did not.
Okay. So when you actually do your job, you do it sometimes at the direction of a detective that's in charge of the case.
Yes, I would say that. I'd agree with that.
Because the detective knows the most about the case, right?
I'd agree with that, yes.
And the detective will say, I want you to look over here for this and over here for that.
Yes.
Okay. And if the detective doesn't do those things, then you basically do it based on your experience, right?
That is correct.
Okay. So you kind of have like a two-tier process to protect the integrity of the item.
Yes, correct.
And I guess a process to try and get the best results possible.
That is correct.
Okay, let's take the gun for example. Prior to you ever seeing this gun, it was fingerprinted by the Massachusetts State Police.
Yes.
Okay, it was processed, and you talked about the super glue process and everything like that. But there's, in your job, you have multiple disciplines, right? And especially with this gun, there are multiple disciplines that could apply to this gun, correct? Forensic science.
In forensic, yes, I'd agree with that.
Okay, so let's take DNA would be one.
Yes.
Okay. Fingerprints would be another.
Yes.
And ballistics could be a third.
Correct.
Okay. And in fact, those three disciplines were utilized in this case.
Yes.
Okay. So at the direction of a detective, the detective could tell you, okay, I want you to swab the trigger of this gun for DNA, correct?
Sure, yes.
Okay. I want you to check the barrel for fingerprints, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And the grips for fingerprints as well, or DNA.
Correct.
Okay. And if you don't get that guidance, of course, you have to base your examinations on your own judgment and experience, correct?
As well as protocols, yes. That's
Okay.
correct.
Now, when you got this gun, it had already been processed for latent prints by the Massachusetts State Police, correct?
Yes.
And I don't know if you spoke to the examiner Lord, he's the bald gentleman.
No, I did not.
Okay, so you just saw the reports.
That's correct.
Okay. But it wasn't processed for DNA by the Massachusetts State Police, as far as you know.
As far, yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, actually.
Okay. And then, you then checked it for your own to see if it had fingerprints.
That's correct.
Took it a step further.
Yes, I processed it for fingerprints, yes.
And you did the grips, took them off.
Yes.
Okay. And so it was kind of like a double checking of the gun for fingerprints, right?
Well, yes, the second time around I did process it, yes.
And both agencies were not able to find any fingerprints of Aaron Hernandez on that gun.
That's correct.
After you got the gun actually in 2015, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Were you made aware that Detective Camper had the gun in ballistics before you?
Not that I recall, no.
Okay. Do you know if he was aware that he was getting it first?
Objection.
If you were aware.
Sustained in that form.
Okay. There's a chain of custody that comes along with all of these items, right?
Yes.
Okay, so when you get the item of evidence, it's in a package that tells you where it's been and who's opened it, right?
Yes, along I also received a custody receipt.
That was where I was going next. So there's also a custody receipt that kind of tells you the traveling way of this item of evidence, where it's been and who's had it.
Actually, the custody receipt only comes from the previous unit that had it before me.
But you could also do research and check that out as well.
Yes, I could.
Okay. So, Detective Camper got it, then you got it.
No, the firearm came from our crime lab.
Okay. But you're aware that he had the gun in 2013, 2 years before you, right? Oh, I'm sorry, you just testified no.
I don't know. I know that it came from the crime lab, and I don't know the chain of custody previous to that.
Okay. And then, after you got it, it was then turned over for DNA, correct?
No, it actually went to the crime lab previous to latent prints for DNA, and then came to us, and then it went to our firearms unit.
Okay, so Detective Reynolds, I'm sorry, crime scene investigator Reynolds had it before you.
That's correct.
Okay. But after Detective Camper and after the state police.
I actually don't know the chain of custody previous to the crime lab.
Okay. Now, as you testified that fingerprints are called chance impressions.
Yes,
Kind of gave that like a little layman's label, right?
sure.
Okay. And chance impressions are because, as you pointed out in one study, that 38% of the time you get it, and by chance based on various factors, sometimes you get fingerprints, sometimes you won't.
That's correct.
And however, fingerprint evidence has been around since the 1800s, correct?
I'd agree with that, yes.
And there's been very little advancement in the era of fingerprints other than its digitization. Let's try to get that word out. Other than that, it's pretty much still the same, right? You check the ridge details, the number of points, things like that.
Yeah, I'd say that there's far more processing methods, and you know, the methodology for comparing fingerprints has evolved since then.
I'll give you that one.
Okay.
But then DNA came along, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and DNA is considered the gold standard in forensic science.
Objection.
If you have an opinion on that, you may express it.
I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay. The DNA is, of course, not observable to the naked eye.
I don't know. I'm not a DNA expert.
Okay. But you collect DNA, do you not?
Sometimes, and I have collected it previously. However, if an item is requested to have DNA collected from it, it does go to our crime lab, and the crime lab will collect it.
But you have experience in collecting DNA.
I have collected it in the past, yes.
Okay. And you're aware of its sensitivity.
Yeah, I'd say I'm aware of it, yes.
Okay. In fact, when you enter a crime scene, you take precautions not to contaminate that crime scene because of potential DNA evidence.
I'd agree with that, yes.
Okay. And even when you examine certain items of evidence, like a gun, you would, of course, take certain precautions if you know that that's going to be tested for DNA at some point.
Yes, however, once again, that if DNA is going to be collected, it will go to the crime lab previous to us, to it being submitted to our latent print unit.
Just not in this case, because Massachusetts had it, the state police had it before you, right?
It did go to our crime lab before it came to latent prints in this case.
But the Massachusetts State Police latent examiner's office had it first before you guys got it, right?
They did, yes.
Okay, so not in this case. DNA came after.
Yes, after the state police processed it, yes.
And also after ballistics, correct? Since ballistics had it in 2013?
If they did their examination in 2013, then yeah, it came after that.
Okay, and now let's talk briefly about the car. This car was processed by you.
Yes.
Okay. And when you process any item, especially, you actually process the inside of the car, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And when you process an item that's indoors, I noticed you use the term known samples or known fingerprints.
Known exemplars, yes.
Okay, known exemplars. That's basically telling you, for example, if we're inside a house and you're fingerprinting inside a house, you're taking into consideration who lives there, right?
When referring to known exemplars, actually known exemplars are taken in a controlled setting. I'll just say back at the Boston Police Department with ink on a white piece of paper, and we know the person that's leaving those fingerprints.
That's a poor question, I'm sorry. What I'm trying to state in English is when you have an item that you know belongs to someone, that's always taken into consideration, right?
I would compare the victims or anyone who had legitimate access to the area or the item, yes.
So you would expect to find Aaron Hernandez's fingerprints in Aaron Hernandez's car.
Yes, that's correct.
That's a given for you right off the bat, right?
I'd agree with that, yes.
Okay. But if a second person who didn't want their fingerprints there wiped the scene down, that's kind of what you're looking for, right?
I'm actually just looking to recover fingerprints and then hopefully eventually identify them to, just identify them. It doesn't matter to me actually who I identify them to.
Again, another poorly posed question. If someone didn't want to be connected to that car, I guess what you testified to is it appeared to you the car was wiped down, right?
That's correct.
In fact, you took some great photographs demonstrating, this is probably a better one. For the record, I'm showing Exhibit 235D. Well, maybe that's not a better example. Here's some white marks, correct? That you took?
That's actually the latent we recovered off the sunroof.
Oh, sorry. There you go. You see those streaks?
Yes.
Okay, you were observant enough to actually catch this, that someone had gone through the trouble of wiping this car down, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that would be important for an investigation if someone was kind of trying to cover up their fingerprints.
I'd agree that it was important for an investigation, but also it's just a way to document why we actually didn't recover many fingerprints or fingerprints from the vehicle as well.
Okay. And again, this being Aaron's car, you're already expecting to find his prints there, correct?
Sustained in that form.
Okay. If an unknown individual, actually you took these photographs to try and demonstrate to this jury that somebody wiped that car down. Possibly.
Sorry. I personally actually didn't take those photographs. They were taken by a crime scene response unit, but yes, they were for documentation purposes.
Someone didn't want to be associated with that car. Well, if someone didn't want to be associated with that car, they would wipe it down, correct?
Sustained.
Let me see if I can rephrase the question. When someone who doesn't own a car doesn't want to show that they've ever been in that car, some of the things they might do is wipe the car down.
Objection.
Is sustained.
I'll withdraw the question. Let me ask you the last thing that was done to the car, if I can. And that is, there were some GSR samples taken?
I actually don't know.
Okay. Are you aware at all as to whether...
Are you asking if the witness has personal knowledge?
Yes. Were you made aware that GSR stubs were done of the car?
No.
And they were not done by you?
No.
Can I have just one moment, Judge? think I found a better way, with the assistance of someone who knows a little more, to ask you this question better. It would not surprise you to find Aaron Hernandez's prints in Aaron Hernandez's car, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. But if you found someone else's fingerprints in that car, that could be an investigative lead.
No, overruled.
I'd agree with that.
No further questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Anything further, Kamala? Thank you, Mr. Tolan.
Thank you.
Please watch your step.
Thank you.
Kamala.
Commonwealth calls Amy Reynolds.
Thomas, go to the testimony you should give this court and jury, and the issue of pending between the Commonwealth and the defendant and the prosecutor, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Watch your step, Allison. Mr. Lee.
Thank you. If you wouldn't mind, could you just introduce yourself to the members of the jury, and if you could please spell your last name?
My name is Amy Reynolds. It's Reynolds.
And can you tell us by whom you're employed?
I work at the Boston Police Department Crime Laboratory.
How long have you been with the Boston Police Department Crime Lab?
Over 16 years.
And what year did you begin?
In 2001.
Can you tell us what your present title is there?
My present title there is a Criminalist 4.
And do you have any specific responsibilities as a Criminalist 4?
Yes, I oversee the trace evidence section.
And can you tell us what trace evidence is and what kind of work you do with respect to trace evidence?
Trace evidence is all of, we always say, it's all of the small stuff that's transferred in the commission of a crime, hairs, fibers, paint, glass, tape, as well as other unknown substances. All of us, excluding our DNA analysts, are also general criminalists, so we do general criminalistics work as well.
And how long have you been the leader of the trace evidence section?
Since 2008.
Can you tell us a little bit about your career within the department prior to becoming a Criminalist 4?
Within the department, I started out as a forensic technologist, which was more of a training position. Basically, I was training in all of the disciplines that I am now competent in, as well as I was assisting the other senior analysts with their cases, and training in crime scene response, things like that. Then I was moved up or promoted to a criminalist job, which means that I'm competent in certain disciplines where I can take casework on, process those cases, testify in court, still go to crime scenes when called upon, and do training outside of that. And then in 2008, I was promoted to a senior criminalist, which has since been, the name has been changed to a Criminalist 4. So a senior criminalist and a Criminalist 4 are synonymous with each other. And basically I oversee, as I said, the trace evidence section. So I not only get casework as well in the disciplines that I'm competent within, but I also oversee the general day-to-day operations of the trace evidence section, making sure that the instruments are calibrated, that the analysts are following the protocol that they need to, as well as I train incoming analysts also.
In addition to your specialty of trace evidence, do you have any other areas that you specialize in?
As I said before, I'm a general criminalist as well, so we do get cases where I describe the clothing, I'll do the preliminary testing, send things off to either DNA or latent prints, but I'm also competent within bloodstain pattern analysis as well as gunshot residue distance determination.
And can you tell us a little bit about your formal education, beginning with your time as an undergraduate?
Yes, I received my Bachelor of Arts in Biochemistry from the University of Colorado, and then went on to receive my Master's of Science in Forensic Science from the University of Illinois in Chicago.
And especially with respect to trace evidence, bloodstain pattern analysis, and was it gunshot residue distance determinations, can you tell us what specialized training you've received with respect to those three disciplines?
As an employee of the Boston Police Department, we get an extensive in-house training for all of the disciplines that I'm competent within. So we get workshops, we watch other scientists do their testing. Through those workshops, we then, answer questions, read literature. We also take outside courses in those disciplines, and then it all culminates at the end with a competency exam in each discipline. The competency exam is kind of like a mock case where we have a practical part. We get items of evidence, and we have to write a report as to our analysis and our opinion, and then we have a oral component, typically that is a mock trial.
And that competency examination is administered by whom?
By the supervisor within that discipline.
And have you taken competency examinations with respect to all three of those disciplines?
Trace, bloodstain pattern, actually in trace evidence it's a lot of different competency exams, but yes, umbrella of trace evidence, gunshot residue distance determination, and bloodstain pattern analysis.
Is the Boston Police Department Crime Lab an ASCLD accredited laboratory?
Yes, we are.
And how long has the Boston Police Department Crime Lab been ASCLD accredited?
We've been accredited since May of 2002.
Now, do you hold any certifications as a criminalist for?
Yes, I do.
And what kind of certifications do you hold? And if you could please explain to the members of the jury what that means.
I hold I'm a certified crime scene analyst with the International Association for Identification, and I'm also a diplomat in criminalistics and a fellow in hair and fiber with the American Board of Criminalistics. Each of those organizations they're separate organizations, but for the most part, they look at your experience, they look at your education, your training, and then you have to pass that level, and then you have to take a very extensive exam, pass that exam to become certified in those areas. For the International Association for Identification, they ask you to take a re-examination every 5 years, as well as do continuing education. And for American Board of Criminalistics, you have to do a certain amount of continuing education or training or anything like that that gets you enough points every 5 years.
In your time at the Boston Police Department, have you also had an opportunity to do work with serology?
Yes.
And can you explain to the members of the jury what the study of serology is?
Serology is basically the study of bodily fluids.
And I take it that includes blood?
Yes.
And in your time as a member of the Boston Police Department Crime Lab, have you done in the field presumptive tests for the presence of human blood and blood in general?
Presumptive test is for the identification of just blood itself, and then we do another test for the indication of human blood. Yes.
And do those tests, at least let's stick with the presumptive test for the presence of blood, is that a test that can be performed out in the field at a scene as well as in the laboratory?
Yes.
Ms. Reynolds, I want to direct your attention to July 17th of 2012. On that date, did you receive some serological evidence in the Boston Police Department Crime Lab in connection with the July 16, 2012 shooting deaths of Daniel De Abreu and Safira Furtado?
Yes.
And those items that were turned into the Boston Police Department Crime Lab on July 17th came from whom, if you can recall?
Yeah, they came from Police Officer Michael Griffin.
And what were those items?
There were, item number 2 was a bloodstain collection kit, and item number 4 was a wristlet.
Now, with respect to item number 2, well, let me back up. I take it you did not go to the scene of the shooting on July 16th of 2012, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the items that you received in the blood evidence collection kit, you would have no personal knowledge of from where within the scene those items were recovered, is that fair to say?
Correct.
Okay. Within item number 2, the blood stain collection kit, how many different stains did you receive?
There were basically 6 envelopes, swab envelopes, 5 of them being reddish-brown stains and 1 of them being a control.
And could you explain to the members of the jury what a control is?
Yeah, a control is basically a background of whatever the source the blood is coming from or being picked up from. So if it was off the street or a sidewalk or anything like that, they would take a control next to it and not get any, of course, any blood on that one. It's a negative control, basically.
With respect, leaving aside the control swab, how did you distinguish the other reddish-brown stained swabs?
Those were all distinguished by what was on the outside of the swab envelope. So what was written on the outside of the swab envelope were a short description and cone numbers.
And did they coincide with numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6?
Correct.
All right. With respect to the reddish-brown stain associated with the number 2 or cone number 2, did you perform any presumptive testing on that item?
I did.
And what was the result of your test?
It was preliminary positive for the presence of blood, which indicates the presence of blood.
Can you also do the same for us, at least tell us what the result of your tests were and what kind of tests you performed with respect to the reddish-brown stains that were associated with cones 3, 4, 5, and 6?
Yes. Each one of them was tested, same exact test, and they were all from cone 3, 4, 5, and 6 were all positive for the presence of blood, indicating the presence of blood.
With respect to item number 4 and a wristlet, did you perform any presumptive tests for the presence of blood on that item?
I did not examine that item.
Want to direct your attention now to July 19th of 2012, 2 days later. Did you receive a number of items into the crime lab from Detective Paul McIsaac?
I did.
And with respect to, well, let me back up. Those items were all given crime lab item numbers, is that correct?
Yes, they were.
Okay, are you familiar with item number 24 that was assigned to a particular piece of clothing?
Yes.
And could you describe for the members of the jury what item number 24 was?
May I refer to my report? Item 24 is a white V-neck t-shirt, short-sleeve t-shirt, and it did have some reddish-brown stains on it, mostly on the front right side.
And that was a t-shirt associated with Aquilino Freire?
Correct.
Now, did you do any testing with respect to that particular item?
I did. I tested a representative reddish-brown stain on the front lower middle, and it was presumptively positive, indicating the presence of blood.
Did you also do anything else with respect to that item in anticipation of your testimony in court today?
Yes, I did mount it for court purposes.
Ms. Reynolds, showing you that item, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what do you recognize that item to be?
This is item 24, the shirt belonging to Mr. Freire.
And did you, that's the mount that you created as in anticipation of your testimony?
Correct.
And other than the fact that it's now been mounted, is it in the same or substantially the same condition as when you received it into the crime lab?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I'd offer that as the next numbered exhibit.
Without objection, exhibit 240.
Yes, Your Honor.
And Your Honor, with the assistance of the court officers, may I have this published to the jury?
How so? Why don't you just hold it up, walk down the box?
Ms. Reynolds, other than performing the presumptive test for the presence of blood on item number 24, did you notice any damage to the T-shirt?
I did not note any damage.
Referring you now to the item that was given, the number 25, do you recall that item?
Yes.
And what's that?
That was a pair of plaid slip-on shoes.
With the brand Morona?
Correct.
And were those shoes associated with Mr. Freire as well?
Yes, they were.
And can you tell us what you did with respect to that item?
I just examined them, basically. I did note that and collect a clear hard particle from the sole of the right shoe, and that was designated as item 65 after that. And also that there was reddish-brown stains on the shoes, mostly on the top right shoe.
Did you perform any testing with respect to the hard particle, that is the clear hard particle that you retrieved from the bottom of the right shoe?
I did not.
And you mentioned that you did some testing for the presumptive testing for the presence of blood on those shoes?
Yes, I did.
And what was the result that you obtained?
I tested a representative sample from the top right shoe, and it was presumptively positive, indicating the presence of blood.
Referring your attention now to item number 26, are you familiar with that item?
Yes.
And what was that item?
It was a dark pair of blue jeans, also from Mr. Freire.
And did you perform any testing with respect to any stains found on that pair of pants?
Yes.
And what did you do?
There was reddish-brown stains on the pants, mostly on the right front side. I tested a representative stain from the front right upper leg, and it was preliminary positive for the presence of blood.
I want to direct your attention now to July 25th of 2012, approximately 6 days later after you received Mr. Freire's clothing into the crime lab. Did you receive on July 25th some articles of clothing related to or belonging to Mr. Safiro Furtado?
I did.
And directing your attention to item number 32, do you recognize that number?
Yes.
And what was that item?
That was a red, yellow, plaid shirt, button-down shirt from Mr. Furtado.
And did you do an examination of that shirt when you received that item?
Yes.
And what kind of examination did you do initially? Visual examination?
So it was a visual examination. I did see some damage to the shirt. There was a hole in the upper right shoulder or sleeve area. That was about 1/4 of an inch in diameter. And then there was a hole that hole on the upper right shoulder was designated as hole number 1. And then there was a hole in the upper back middle. It was about 1/2 an inch by 1/8 of an inch, and that I designated as hole number 2. There was also heavy reddish-brown staining across the whole shirt, as well as some clotted reddish-brown stains.
Now, with respect to the hole that you described as number 2, is it fair to say that you discovered that hole on a different date than you discovered hole number 1?
Correct.
Okay. And do you remember the date that you discovered hole number 2 on?
I would have to look at my notes.
Okay. We can save that for the time being. Now, with respect to item number 32, you mentioned that you saw some reddish-brown staining on that shirt.
Correct.
And did you do any presumptive tests for the presence of blood with respect to the reddish-brown staining you found on item number 32?
Yes, I did.
And what were the results of your testing?
The results of my testing were I tested a reddish-brown stain, a representative reddish-brown stained area from the front lower left of the shirt, and it was presumptively positive for the presence of blood.
Other than the visual examination that you conducted, as well as the presumptive test for blood on item number 32, did you also do something else with respect to that shirt in anticipation of your testimony today?
Yes, I did mount it.
Mr. Lee, we'll look at that after a brief recess. Ladies and gentlemen, take 5 minutes.